Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, a former premier turned president, Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo, wins the second round vote of Somalia's fraught elections. Also, more fatal violence in Bangui a day after unrest is triggered in the PK5 neighbourhood by the killing of a militia chief known as Bigman. And school's in when it's out. We meet some of the migrant kids taking over the classroom of a South African private school after its usual pupils leave for the day. But first, a former Prime Minister is Somalia's new leader. Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo won after incumbent Hassan Sheikh Mohammed conceded the win on Wednesday. The poll was marred by allegations of corruption, but is still key to restabilising a country undermined by decades of conflict, famine and extremist attacks.
After 6 hours and 2 rounds of vote, the incumbent Hassan Sheikh Mohammed admitted defeat. Somalia's new president is Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo.
The position of president is not easy, and there is a daunting task ahead of me. I know that, but I will work hard to make sure your dreams are accomplished.
Supporters of this former prime minister were ecstatic.
Yeah, I'm very satisfied. Great. Somalia is back to its position. It is member of international world now.
The new president, Farmajo, I'm very happy today because the new president, Farmajo, is the voice of people. Farmajo!
Fearing an attack by Al-Shabaab, the vote was held behind the secure blast walls of the capital's airport. Farmajo was elected by 275 lawmakers and 54 senators. They had been chosen by 14,000 elders. The government and its Western backers said that because of Al-Shabaab, it would have been impossible to secure polling stations across the country. Before the 2 rounds of voting, there appeared to be much horse trading between lawmakers. Measures were taken to limit bribes.
From the gate, you cannot bring here huge amounts of cash. You cannot bring here checkbooks. You cannot bring these kind of things that can be used to interfere with the transparency and the genuine expression of the will of the voters.
Anti-corruption groups alleged that hundreds of thousands of dollars changed hands during the campaign. But many Somalis were relieved that in the end it was a peaceful transition of power just 4 years after the last election. Wednesday's poll was only the second presidential election to be held in this war-torn country since 1991.
Well, Farmajo's inauguration was met by celebratory gunfire across Mogadishu. Duncan Woodside tells us more about the man who has his work cut out for him in heading up a troubled nation.
In terms of Farmajo's background, he spent a lot of time in the United States in the 1980s. From 1985 onwards, he worked within the Somali mission, the diplomatic mission within America. He also spent time in New York studying there and working within the New York Transportation Department. He has subsequently travelled back to Somalia over 2010 to 2011. He was briefly Prime Minister for about 8 months before he fell out with the then President Sheikh Sharif. And obviously he's been chosen by Somalis, many of them young lawmakers, in an effort to try to breathe new life into the government here. There is a perception that the previous president lost his way. There were big allegations of corruption, and indeed Farmajo has pledged to crack down on corruption when he comes into office. He'll be facing many challenges, of course. There is not just the task of building institutions, which are still largely in their infancy. The country depends very heavily on an African Union peacekeeping mission here. Is also facing the threat of a renewed famine.
Duncan Woodside there for us from Mogadishu. Now, the former chief executive of Kenya's Electoral Commission was amongst 3 men arrested in dawn raids in Nairobi on Wednesday. James Oswago later appeared in court charged with receiving bribes from British printing firm Smith and Usman, which won contracts to print election material in past votes. The company was the first ever to be convicted of foreign bribery in the UK courts. Oswago is also facing earlier charges related to the procurement of voter ID devices and solar lanterns. There was more fatal violence in Bangui on Wednesday. Fighters stormed a health centre in the Central African capital a day after clashes in the notorious PK5 neighbourhood were sparked by security forces trying to question a local militia leader. He was known as Bigman and was killed in a shootout. Zach Bordoff brings us more.
It was a long night for the residents of the PK5 neighbourhood in Bangui. Yesterday afternoon, Central African security forces shot dead a man called Bigman. He was the head of a local militia. Now, his supporters went out and started setting fires to houses in the area. There were self-defense groups, but they weren't able to protect everybody. Several people were killed, including a local pastor. Now, the fighting has caused some displacement of people in the area. Some have been going to the Mpoko International Airport in the capital. This is the site where there were thousands. The government cleared the site just a few weeks ago. And now they're coming back and they're angry.
The government forced us to leave this camp to go back to Fondo. The problem is that Bigman and his militias are in that area of Bangui, and the government asked the police to kill him. The government is incapable of ensuring our security.
The government has not yet announced what measures it'll take to restore order to the area, but the Ministry of Public Security has called on the public to remain calm.
Zach Bordoff there for us. Now, South Africa's presidents added more than 400 soldiers to the security team for Thursday's annual State of the Nation address. Troops usually only play a ceremonial role. The moves led opposition MPs to accuse Jacob Zuma of paranoia and of militarising the event. Now, Zuma's had a rough time addressing Parliament ever since the Economic Freedom Fighters Party won seats in 2014. They've often interrupted him with chanting and jeering over the various scandals he's been linked to. Now, the Zimbabwean pastor behind last year's This Flag protest movement was freed on bail by the High Court on Wednesday. Evan Mawariwe was arrested last week and charged with subverting the government. He was held after returning from the US to where he'd fled after he was arrested and released last July. A case over the heavy-handed response to the This Flag rallies was also brought against President Robert Mugabe. Accusations that he'd violated the Constitution were dismissed by the Constitutional Court on Wednesday. International airlines are refusing to fly to the hub that's meant to replace the international airport that serves Abuja. Nnamdi Azikiwe International Airport closes for 6 weeks of runway repairs in March. And flights are meant to be diverted to Kaduna, which is 170 kilometres away. But Lufthansa, Air France and South African Airways say that they will not reroute certain flights to anywhere else in Nigeria. British Airways and Turkish Airlines have suspended ticket sales for Abuja during the renovation period. That all spells bad news for investor confidence in the recession-hit country. A private South African school has started a special after-hours program that allows migrant children who had nowhere to learn to take advantage of empty afternoon classrooms and pick up their educations once more.
Are you taking?
3 years ago, Claude couldn't speak English. This 12-year-old from the Democratic Republic of Congo spoke only French when he arrived in South Africa with his family. Now he takes classes every afternoon with other refugee children.
Here I learn everything. English, maths, all that I'll need for when I leave to go to a normal school.
These children come from various African countries, such as the DRC, Burundi, Zimbabwe and Eritrea. They are denied access to public schools as they lack the legal paperwork and the financial means, and struggle with language barriers. The Sacred Heart College, an expensive private school, opens its empty classrooms to them after hours in a program called 3 to 6.
We became a multiracial school in 1976, and we consider the treatment of refugee children in South Africa to be a new social injustice.
Some of the children have experienced xenophobia, ranging from insults to attacks, as the Rainbow Nation struggles to accommodate its many asylum seekers. A problem the teachers understand all too well. They are refugees themselves who can't work in mainstream South African schools.
C'est un programme où nous pouvons Thanks to this programme, we can give our best being refugees, because they are our children. I feel proud to help these children, refugees, like me, for their future.
Every year, roughly a quarter of the children from 3 to 6 integrate into mainstream schools. A model that has already inspired a European volunteer who worked here, who went on to establish a similar program for Syrian children in Germany.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us. Do so again. Take care.